Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming back again tonight. I am going to be starting a series on postpartum care, the care that you would receive after you've had your baby. That care starts immediately after you've had your baby, and we'll be looking at what should be happening to you up until 6 weeks. This is called the postpartum period, and even though things may have gone okay for you in the hospital or birth center or wherever you had your baby, there can still be some issues that can arise during the postpartum period. Two big ones are hemorrhage and preeclampsia. Tonight, we're going to spend our time on hemorrhage. Before we get going with our video, I would like to invite you to please subscribe to me if you have liked the information that I have been sharing with you over the last few weeks. If you subscribe to the channel, it's helpful to both you and me. You get to be notified of the things that I will be bringing up, new content. And also, I want to hear from you about the kinds of topics that you would like to hear about as well. I have a free ebook that will be in the description that you can download, and that ebook is Why Women Are Dying, Women of Color Are Dying During Birth. And the other is I will soon be coming out with a new course to share with families, to help families become prepared, to look at what is the birth experience they want to have and how can they get there with that. So I will be bringing more information about that. But tonight, let's talk about postpartum hemorrhage and postpartum bleeding. How much is enough and how much is too much? The one thing I want to say is that we talk about postpartum. A lot of issues can happen within the first 24 hours and in the first week. When we look at hemorrhage, hemorrhage is the second main cause for why women of color are dying in this country. It's also the second reason for why women are dying throughout the world is hemorrhage. And this can occur within the first 24 hours after you've had your baby up through the first week. And what we do know is that half of the maternal deaths occurring in this country, about half, 47%, are occurring within the first 6 weeks after they've during pregnancy and after the baby's been born. And then about another 53% are happening from that 6-week period up until the first year. When we look at postpartum, it's divided into 3 different areas. Immediate postpartum, which is the first 24 hours after you've had your baby. Then the early postpartum period is from about that 24 hours up until 6 weeks after you've had your baby. And then the extended postpartum period, which is a new terminology for a lot of people, is from 6 weeks up until about 1 year after you've had your baby. So tonight we're going to really pay attention to bleeding, how much is enough and how much is too much. After you've had your baby, you should be watched after you've had the placenta is born, baby's out. You should be evaluated every 15 minutes for the first hour to make sure that you are not bleeding too much and to make sure that the uterus is clamping down as it should to be able to help have those kind of what we would call, they are still contractions, but they're called afterbirth pains. And what they are doing is helping to clamp down on the blood vessels inside of the uterus. Let me show you an example. Inside of the uterus, the blood vessels are interlocked. They're in sort of a S-shaped format. Now, my fingers are not going to get into an S-shaped format, but this is some idea. You can see that they're interlocked. And when the uterus is cramping as it should, it is causing the blood vessels to clamp down on each other in this interlocked format. And as you can see, If it's clamped down, then it will help to stop the bleeding. If it is not clamped down, then you will continue to have this bleeding. So therefore, every 15 minutes, the nurse should come around and check the uterus. It should be located at your belly button, at the navel, is where it should be located after you have had your baby. And as the postpartum period progresses, for every day, it should reduce about a finger breadth, which is my finger or your finger, a finger breadth below. Okay, so on day 1, you should see that the uterus is about 1 finger breadth below the navel. On day 2, it should be about 2 finger breadths below the navel. Day 3, 3 finger breadths below the navel. That way we know that the uterus is cramping down as it should, and it is reducing back to the size that it was prior to the pregnancy. It takes 6 full weeks for the uterus to be able to heal, and that is because after you have had the baby, then the placenta, which is attached to the wall of the uterus, will detach itself. And from the area that it detaches itself is sort of a raw area. Think about, if you scrape yourself or something, there's a raw area there. And it takes time for the body to heal over. And so therefore, it takes really, that amount of time is about 6 weeks. So mom is recuperating. Even when you've had a normal vaginal birth, your body has gone through a very normal process, but it still needs to heal, and you still need to take care, take it easy, and give your body time to rest and to adjust, okay? Now, when we talk about the bleeding that you have, it is called lochia, L-O-C-H-I-A. You may hear that term in the hospital, your lochia. And what it is the discharge that you're having from your vagina after you've had your baby. And this is the bleeding that you're having normal from the uterus. For the first few days, it will be somewhat of a bright reddish color, mimicking your period. It may not be quite as heavy as your period, but it mimics your period. Over time, it should change to what's called more of a pinkish color, where it's not as bloody, it's more pinkish, more the serous, or more of a watery, as opposed to a full blood, okay? It should be more of a pinkish or a dark reddish color, okay? And then the last stage is then it should turn to more of a yellowish or a whitish color. And this should happen, this progression, probably over the 2 to 3 weeks after you've had your baby. Once the discharge has gotten to be the yellowish whitish color, it should not go back to red or pink. If it does, it can be an indication of a number of things. It could indicate that you're doing too much activity. It can also be an indication if you should not have discharge that has any kind of foul odor, or it should not be too much in amount. These things could indicate infection if it has a foul odor to it. And if you're bleeding too much, it could indicate possibility of hemorrhage. Now, how do you know if you're doing too much activity? If you're doing too much activity, it can cause the discharge to go from this yellowish whitish color back to pink, and also back to a reddish color. And it doesn't take a lot to be doing too much. Even normal household activities can be too much. So we would counsel moms that when they have their babies, particularly if there's steps in the house, that you make a decision where you're going to be for the day. If you are planning to be downstairs, hopefully the bathroom is also downstairs, that you have someone move everything that you need for the baby, have it downstairs, so that once you go downstairs, you're downstairs for the period of time for the day, or the period of time that you're going to be downstairs. Everything that you need for the baby is all there. Bathroom is there, so that you don't have to go up and down the steps. Things simply as going up and down the steps too much can be too much activity. Now, the other question is, how do I know if I am bleeding too much? I'm going to show you a demonstration so that you can actually see. And this demonstration, I remember from when I was a student midwife, it impressed me so much that I think if I'm able to show that to you, that it would really clench in your mind as to what is too much bleeding. So I'm going to adjust the camera a bit and let you see what I'm doing here. So what I have before me, we have, the pad that you would have down on your bed, right? And I have two pads that you would have. I'm using Always. This is the heaviest pad. It's the size number 5. And that size number 5 is the heavy, very heavy overnight pad. And what I want to do, I've used Jello to be able to have you see what could be the amount of bleeding that you would possibly have if you filled up the pad. Interestingly, the box does not indicate how much blood the pad holds. And when we talk about saturating the pad, we are talking about where the pad is totally filled. And when you look at the back of the pad, you are seeing blood, towards the back. So I want to demonstrate to you how much blood there could be when you fill up this pad. So what I've done is mixed up Jello, and then you can see. So I'm going to just pour this Jello over one pad. And saturate is when it starts to go, if it's going to go over the edge at all, we're filling up this entire pad, okay? This is about 3/4 of a cup, okay, on this one pad. And 3/4 of a cup is going to be approximately 70 or 80 cc's, all right? All right. Now, when you are starting to have bleeding, what you want to notice is the color, the amount, and the time started. We would say to you that you are bleeding too much if you are saturating a pad every hour. So let's try a second pad and say, okay, this was 8 o'clock in the morning before everything had been okay, and now I'm getting all of this bleeding. This would be, say, if you are still had not been discharged from the hospital, or if you are at home or in a birth center. We're going to measure how much bleeding you are getting, okay? But I am at home, and I'm noticing that there's increased amount of blood. Okay, we're going from, this was from 8 o'clock until 9. I've now put on a new pad, and this is 9 in the morning until 10 o'clock. Oh my goodness. So we now have 1.5 cups of blood in these two pads. And that 1.5 cups is going to actually, I'm sorry, we have 3/4 of a cup. Yes, 1.5 cups is going to be over 300 cc's of blood, okay? When we talk about hemorrhage, hemorrhage is 500 cc's of blood. So when we're talking about 3/4 of a cup, we are talking 180 cc's of blood. I'm sorry, for 1.5 cups, we're talking about 240 plus another 60. We're talking 300 cc's of blood on these two pads here, okay? That is too much blood. When you're seeing this amount of blood, you need to be in touch with your provider And my recommendation is that you are calling an ambulance to get to the nearest facility. Because if you continue to bleed like this, by the time you get yourself ready and dressed, get to the hospital if you were driving, what if you're dealing with traffic? You're bleeding way too much. Then you know if you drive to the hospital, the amount of time it takes for admission, the amount of times that how long it takes for you to sit in the waiting room, waiting for them to call you, because when you go in by car, they're not going to treat you as quickly as if you go in by an ambulance. So my recommendation is that you would call your provider and call the ambulance, okay, and get to your nearest facility. I would also recommend that you take the pads with you. And why is that? It is sometimes difficult to describe the amount of blood that you are having. And so if you take the pads with you, we also know it is reported over and over and over again that providers are not listening to women. They're not listening to women. And so if you take the pads along with you and the pad from your bed, take it in a bag, then the provider can see the amount of blood that you are talking about. Now, sometimes you can have blood clots as well. And so let's just measure what that can be. I have 2 sizes of blood clots that I've measured out. One is like about 1/8 of a cup of size, okay? A blood clot that could look like that. And that might be somewhat of an average blood clot that you might have. That's about 30 cc's, okay? If you have a larger blood clot that comes out, that's 1/4 of a cup. And we're talking about hemorrhage occurring when you have 2 cups of blood, 2 cups. Boy, if I saw this, oh my gosh, what would be your reaction? You would not play if you saw this amount of blood from anybody. You know that there's something serious going on. So, again, things to watch for with bleeding. You want to look, again, it's normal that you will have discharge, some bloody discharge once you have a baby. It's called lochia. However, over the next days, that lochia should reduce in amount and it will change in color. It will go from a bright red color to more of a pinkish or dark reddish color over the next few days. From that, it should then go to a yellowish or whitish color over the next 2 to 3 weeks after you've had your baby. However, you should not have where the lochia goes back to pink or back to red, okay? That's an indication that you're doing too much activity, number 1. However, if the amount is such that you start to increase the amount, then it could be an indication that you're bleeding too much, that you could run into having a hemorrhage. As we have seen here, this is way too much. You do not want to have this amount of bleeding. If you were to get this with 1 pad, I would say that you need to get yourself ready and get to a hospital. Remember that hemorrhage is the 2nd cause for why women are dying when they have a baby. The other thing that I want to also say is to check to see if you have any sort of odor with the discharge. If you're having odor, it could be a sign of infection. So this is the information that I have for you in regard to bleeding, what to expect, how much is too much. I hope that you have found this information to be helpful. As I always say, if you have liked the content that I have given to you, please tell your friends, your family, tell your mom, your dad, your aunts, uncles, your sisters, brothers, nieces, nephews, all your friends. So thank you so much. We will continue with topics related to the postpartum period. Next week, we're going to have a guest speaker talking about 8 nutrients that you need during pregnancy and the postpartum period, Dr. Steve Cheney. And then we will continue with other topics in postpartum. I want to particularly cover preeclampsia or toxemia, which can occur once you've had your baby and once you are at home. And if you don't know the signs and symptoms to watch for, then you can get into trouble very quickly. So thank you again for your time, and have a great evening. Have a great week. Thank you. Bye-bye.